Annuna, we have to judge the Annuna by how the Sumerians depicted them. The busts and the statuary that we have from Sumer are easy to find. They don't even hide these things. And they show them as alabaster skinned with long beards, and they
Right.
always have lapis lazuli for their eyes. So you can't call me a racist if I'm looking at a Sumerian depiction of an Annuna and it shows me a white guy. That's what it shows me. It's a white
Right.
guy, whiter than I am. And here it is. These are the Annuna, according to the Sumerians. And the Sumerians were very, very particular in describing themselves as very different. They were olive-skinned with no hair on their bodies, could not grow facial hair, and they had dark eyes and black hair that was long and straight. So we have the Sumerians priding themselves in Sumerian and Akkadian cuneiform text as the black-headed people. This is what they called themselves, and they did it with pride. They were the black-headed people. And they considered the Annuna as gods. But the Annuna weren't gods. They were just white guys. And they had these pouches and they had these tablets, and they did amazing things with them. They made things move that shouldn't move. They built things, and the people, the Sumerians, didn't understand how they could do that. They communicated with devices. The Sumerians couldn't figure out how they did that. They made things appear in the sky and land and take off, and the Sumerians couldn't figure out how they did that. Therefore, ergo, they're gods.
Mm-hmm.
But they weren't. This was the greatest example of cargo cult that had ever happened. This is the story of the Anunnaki. So the Annuna enter the historical record as Shimsu Hor. They're in the Sumer. The Annuna and the Sumerians, they're just Annuna. These are the children of An, or On. Then we have them entering North Africa as Shimsu Hor. So they're called the Shining Ones, which is not a reference to them being gods. They were considered as gods, but it wasn't. They're shining because most people on the surface of the world had suffered through a cataclysm, and they had lost their infrastructure, and they were under a matriarchal totem society, and they had built up centuries of melatonin in their skin, and they were able to survive on the surface. Not the Annuna. When the Annuna originally arrived, they avoided the light of the sky. They were known as night walkers. They were known as night crawlers. They came from the mountains, not the sky. Eric von Daniken and Zechariah Sitchin did us a disservice by trying to claim that the Anunnaki are extraterrestrials and they came here in the ancient past. This whole ancient alien scenario all falls apart upon scrutiny. Even the Watchers in the Book of Enoch did not come from the sky. They were called Watchers because Asiatic peoples always look at Westerners, Caucasians with big goggle eyes. They call them Watchers, owl people. Even in the Book of Enoch, the Watchers came from Mount Ardon. They came out of a mountain after a cataclysm, and when they came, they taught the people technology. That's what Enoch says. Enoch lists all the things. They taught the people cosmetics, textiles, the weaving. They taught them how to make barrels. They taught them how to make canal works. They taught them weapons. They taught how the women how to beautify. They even taught spermicides. So all these are listed in the Book of Enoch and in the Book of Jasher of what the Watchers taught men. But over many centuries had passed, and they had been deified as gods. But the descendants of the Annuna are nothing but the descendants of Caucasians from a cataclysmic period where the Caucasians had surfaced from the underworld. The story of the birth of Noah, though, is the birth of a whole merging of the Annuna and the local population that was on the surface. The Annuna had no pigmentation. They could not produce the necessary melatonin. They'd been in the underworld too long. They had been living under artificial lighting too long. When they came up in 3439 BC, came down Mount Ardon, wherever it was, and there were the Watchers, they had these huge eyes. This is why they were called Watchers, the owl people. This is why basically Oriental art always shows white people with goggle eyes. This is why the Sumerians actually showed these Annuna statues and busts, these early Sumerian kings, all had lapis lazuli, huge blue eyes. This is what they had. This is what they were known by. And it's because they had been in the underworld for a long time. When they came to the surface, now they needed to in order to perpetuate their existence and pass off their knowledge, because they themselves were a dying race. They could not survive on the surface. So they interbred. And this is what the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jasher focus on, that there was an intermixing between the Watchers and the daughters of men. Now, the sons of God are the Annuna. They're just humans, but they're Caucasian. Right. They're Caucasians who came from the underworld. The daughters of men are talking about the earthborn. These are the surface dwellers. They had high melatonin. They're human too, but their bodies can actually shield themselves from the environment. So the birth of Noah, as in the Dead Sea Scrolls, tells the story really well in the Apocryphon of it's either Apocalypse of Noah or Apocryphon of Noah, and in the Lamech scroll. In the Lamech scroll, the whole story is told how Lamech comes home, finds out his wife, Bitanash, had a child, and the child looked just like one of the sons of God. He accused his wife of having sex with angels. So this is what was going on. They were doing in vitro fertilization. They were doing something, because the story is conveying that the men were not having sex with their wives when their wives were suddenly coming up pregnant, and then the children that were being born were like white-skinned. They didn't understand. I mean, these people are not us. These are not our children. This is what the story is conveyed in the Dead Sea Scrolls, I've cited in my Chronicon, I've cited a couple other traditions that talk about this massive birth of a whole new sub-race. And these are the Caucasians that we know today, such as myself and all my Caucasian brothers and sisters. This is how, according to the traditions, we came about, because of this intermingling of a dying species from the underworld and a perfectly virile, living, protected branch of the human race that was already existing on the surface, and they had just lost their infrastructure. So the Amuru, after the cataclysm, are the direct descendants of Shimsu-Hor and, of course, the Annuna, the whole Noahic race. So that's the Amuru, and the Amuru, when they kind of just dispersed and spread all over the place. I've done several videos on their history, from Backbone of a Giant all the way till more recent videos. But the Amuru were directly related to, yes, the sea peoples of the ancient Americas, and the Tamahu that are mentioned in the Egyptian temple texts, wall texts.
So is it?
So yeah, they're all related. They're all related, and none of them are God.
Well, obviously. So then, did they bring the technology from North America to Africa? I
believe that, but I'm going to go a step further with that. And I'm going to say that you see this little device right here?
Right.
This little device? Here in about 17 years, these devices aren't going to work anymore.
Right.
At least on the surface, infrastructure will be intact in the underworld for that technology to continue. Those in the underworld who come up, and remember, this isn't just Jason saying this. Brother Shipton was very, very specific that after the pass of the two dragons, Phoenix and Nemesis X, remember she said the first dragon will pass 1 century after a world war. That's 1940. So that's when it began. That's when the actual fighting began, the World War. So she's dead on. The second dragon comes quickly afterward. This is Nemesis X in 2046. And she's very specific that after these two dragons are gone and the surface world is destroyed because man has lost his cities and now he has to rebuild on putrefying and dried out ocean beds. Because everything else that he built formerly, all the former continents are now underwater. Now all the places that were formerly under the oceans are on the surface. And the world has been cleaned. It's a totally new world. It's a totally new heavens. And when this is going on, Mother Shipton was very specific. Men will come up wearing like silver suits from the underworld, and they will go around counting the survivors and then beginning to teach them how to rebuild. They're going to have things like this.
Mm-hmm.
The picture she paints about the future is exactly what happened in the past. These little devices were in bags carried by the Annuna, and this is what separated them. This is why the people are like, damn, that's a god. He's got that little bag, and every time he pulls these little devices out of the bag, the device in the Sumerian text is called a me. It's a tablet. The tablet was so astonishing, all the things that it could do and how the gods communicated together. It was so astonishing that after another cataclysm, which is known as the Great Flood, the collapse of the vapor canopy, humans remembered that history, so they started writing knowledge on clay tablets using a stylus. And the new technology was to burn them in a kiln to make them rock hard to preserve them in the future. They started doing that for two reasons. One, because the gods recorded everything on tablets, so we need them too. And two, they needed to burn them and make sure they were hard to survive, because nothing from the age of the gods survived, because they didn't preserve anything. So the Sumerians were going to correct that. This huge loop we're going through, we've gone through it many, many times. And what happened in the ancient past is going to happen looking forward as well. We're about to enter that period.
Yeah, I try to tell people, just take Revelations, put it at the front of Genesis, and then you can figure out how it works.
Yep. Hey, you know what? All the secrets that you need to know in the Bible, they're in three places. They're just in three places. One is the book of Genesis. It's almost like the program for this construct. Then the book of Revelation. This is the Alpha and Omega. This is the Alpha and Omega of the Word. So the third thing you need to look at is only the red letter editions of the New Testament. That's the third element that's vital to understanding Genesis and Revelation, because that is the voice of something outside the construct that has given us a playbook by which on how to escape the construct. Nothing in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John means anything. All the miracles were invented by the Roman Catholic Church. The early fathers didn't mention any of them. Paul does not cite a single miracle of Jesus. Nothing. And there's a reason for that. The red letter editions, just the red letter printing, just the things Jesus said, that is a communication from outside the construct to those of us on the inside who would like to get out. It's a playbook. If you follow it, you will be one of those who in Revelation is being discussed. To him who overcometh, I will give a white robe. To him who overcometh, I will give you a white stone with a new name. These are what you receive in your participation of the Exodus, which is the symbolism of the Great Pyramid. These are all associated to the Great Pyramid. The Great Pyramid had a white robe too. It was 144,000 20-ton white limestone, highly polished casing blocks. That's the mantle. This mantle had to be removed. These casing blocks had to be removed so we could see. This is what apocalypse means, to remove the cover. That's what apocalypse means. Apo and kalyption means to remove the covering. This is what happened in the 14th century AD with a series of earthquakes. It was all by divine decree. These earthquakes shattered that whole beautiful face on the Great Pyramid, and the Muslims came in and they took all that facing off, and they used it for ballast for roads all throughout around Cairo. But it allowed researchers to get into the mysteries of the Great Pyramid and see all these things that no one had ever seen before. This is the period we're going now. Each stone is the soul of man. Therefore, the apocalypse has begun. Not the Great Tribulation, but the apocalypse has begun. And it's a pretty long period. It's a period of events that begin waking everybody up, those who are going to waken up. So yeah, Genesis is the playbook. It's the real contract. Exodus begins the false contract. The elite sign that. They're the ones up under the burning bush contract. The original Abrahamic contract is really the Brahmic contract. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, the whole story of Abraham comes much later in history than the older version of Brahma and his consort Saraswati. Later it was rewritten, it was Semiticized, but the original was not Semitic. It was Semiticized into Abraham and Sarah. But that's the false version. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't even matter. There are two contracts. The one in Genesis matters because it's a part of the Alpha and Omega. Everything in between doesn't matter. And the Alpha and Omega is in reference to the Word. And the Word is only the red letter editions. It's the playbook that each immortal needs to play by. It doesn't matter what your religion, creed, race, none of that matters. The playbook doesn't care about the religious attachments. It doesn't care about your belief in mythology. It doesn't care about any of these beliefs, individual cultural beliefs that you were saturated with as your avatar was born in certain areas of the world. It does not matter. The playbook applies to all people. It is the red letter edition of the New Testament is absolutely spiritual and it's neutral. It has nothing to do with your culture, race, or creed. So yeah, Genesis, Revelation, and the red letter edition of the deal. That's all you need to know. Everything else in the Bible is misdirection. 3439 BC was the first time in the Sumerian records. Remember, this is 432,000 turnings of the stars before the Great Flood, which is 12 centuries on a 360-day year on the Sumerian sexagesimal system. 3439 BC is precisely 432,000 days before 2239 BC, when the Phoenix in the month of May destroyed the world and caused the collapse of the vapor canopy when the sun was born. Now, 3439 BC was the first appearance of the Annuna.
Okay.
First appearance. They appear with Enki in the historical record. Now, the historical record in the mythological context says that the Annuna had been here before. And it says that the black-headed people had been here before. And it said that there was a world before that the Annuna recognized, but they don't give it much detail. There's also references in the Sumerian text by the black-headed people that there was a god. There was an almighty unseen god, but the Annuna did not talk about him. This is very interesting. There's a recognition in Sumerian writings that the Annuna themselves did not regard themselves as gods, that they honored an unseen god. Zechariah Sitchin did talk about this in one of his books. Now, the Annuna appeared in 3439 BC, but I'm telling you, we're living in a construct, and that construct is governed by protocols of programming. And I'm telling you right now, that the story that we are told about the ancient past is exactly what we are told about the future. There is a continuum here. Revelation is about apocalypse that happens so bad that a whole bunch of people go to the underworld. They stay there until it's all over with. By the time they come up, when they do, it's a new heavens and new earth. They don't recognize anything anymore. What happens in the near future with the tribulation and the apocalypse is no different than what already happened in the past. And what's happening in the near future is about to happen again in the past. We're in a loop. Mm-hmm. Those of us who begin to recognize that we are within a construct, those of us who have awakened, is only because the immortal within is now hit that chrysalis period. You are now about to emerge from an avatar that can no longer contain you. This is why you're waking up. So when this reboot happens and sends everybody back to the ancient past to start the program over, there's going to be a lot less participants. These people make their exodus. They're gone. They've moved on to a better place. They have graduated this simulacrum. This is the entire scenario. So yes, the sea peoples are the direct descendants of the Annuna. Yes, they
So
are. They're
it's the
also the
Anuna
direct descendants of
first.
the Amuru. Remember, I talked
So
about the Amuru a lot too.
I,
The,
which
the
yeah.
Amuru were Westerners. They are the Sea Peoples.
So the Amuru are the sea peoples, and they left North America, right, to go over to the African continent. And is that when they became the Anuna, or is this a separate time?